Call off your son's wedding immediately. Go to her house tomorrow morning. You'll understand everything. My dead husband told me that in a dream, one night before the ceremony, and when I followed his words, I discovered a truth that nearly destroyed our family. But before I tell you what happened, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? Because this story still doesn't feel real, even to me. My name is Eleanor. I'm 53 years old, a widow, a mother. And on the night of September 14th, I woke up at 3:47 a.m. with my heart pounding so hard I thought I was having a heart attack. The room was dark, the kind of dark that feels thick, like you could reach out and touch it. The ceiling fan was turning slowly above me, making that familiar clicking sound it always made. The sound Michael used to say he'd fix, but never did. Michael, my husband, dead for 8 months. I could still smell him in that room sometimes, his cologne, Old Spice, the same kind his father wore. I kept one of his shirts in my closet, unwashed, just so I could hold it on the nights when the grief felt too heavy. But that night wasn't about grief. That night, I'd seen him. Not in memory, not in some hazy recollection. I'd seen him in a dream so vivid, so real, that when I woke, I reached across the bed expecting to find him there. The sheets were cold. I sat up slowly, pressing my hand against my chest. My nightgown was damp with sweat. The digital clock on the nightstand glowed red in the darkness. 3:47 a.m. I could still hear his voice. Eleanor. That's what he'd said. My name, the way he always said it, with that slight Tennessee drawl, soft at the edges. Eleanor, listen to me. In the dream, we'd been standing in our backyard, the one we'd built together 28 years ago when we bought this house. The oak tree was there, the one we planted when our son Thomas was born. It was full and green, the way it looked in summer. But it wasn't summer now. It was September. The leaves should have been turning. Michael was wearing his blue flannel shirt, the one I buried him in. His eyes were clear and serious, the way they got when he was about to tell me something important, when he was about to tell me something I didn't want to hear. You have to listen to me, he'd said. This is important. I tried to reach for him, tried to touch his face, but he'd stepped back. Call off Thomas's wedding. Tomorrow. Call it off. What? Michael, what are you? Go to her house tomorrow morning, early, before anyone else is awake. Go to Vanessa's house, Eleanor. You'll understand everything. I don't understand now. Michael, please. You'll understand everything, he repeated. His voice was urgent, desperate almost. Promise me you'll go. Promise me. I promise, I whispered. And then I woke up. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time, trying to steady my breathing. It was just a dream, I told myself. Just a dream. But it didn't feel like a dream. It felt like a warning. I got up slowly and walked to the bathroom, turned on the light. My reflection stared back at me, pale, tired, older than I remembered. The grief had aged me. I could see it in the lines around my eyes, the gray in my hair that I hadn't bothered to dye in months. I splashed cold water on my face. Just a dream. But Michael's voice had been so clear, so real. I walked downstairs, my bare feet cold against the hardwood floor. The house was silent, the kind of silent that only comes in the middle of the night, when the whole world is asleep and you're the only one awake with your thoughts.
I made coffee. I don't know why. It was almost 4 in the morning, and I knew I wouldn't sleep again. But making coffee felt like something normal, something routine. The kitchen smelled like French roast and the faint lemon scent of the dish soap I'd used earlier. I stood at the counter, waiting for the coffee maker to finish, watching the dark liquid drip slowly into the pot. The wedding was tomorrow. Today, technically. In less than 15 hours, my son would marry Vanessa Chen. Beautiful Vanessa. Perfect Vanessa. 26 years old, a pediatric nurse, with a smile that could light up a room. She was kind, thoughtful, always bringing me flowers when she visited, always asking how I was doing, if I needed anything, if there was anything she could do to help. Thomas loved her. I could see it in his eyes every time he looked at her. The way his whole face softened, the way he laughed at her jokes, even the ones that weren't funny. She made him happy. So why would Michael want me to call off the wedding? I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd eaten thousands of meals as a family, where Thomas had done his homework, where Michael and I had our morning coffee together for 25 years. I wrapped my hands around the mug, letting the warmth seep into my skin. Michael had been a practical man, logical. He didn't believe in ghosts or dreams or signs from the universe. He believed in what he could see and touch and prove. So why was I sitting here at 4 in the morning, seriously considering that my dead husband had just warned me about our son's wedding? I took a sip of coffee. It was too hot, and it burned my tongue slightly, but I didn't care. The truth was, I'd been feeling uneasy about the wedding for weeks. Not because of Vanessa. She was lovely, truly. But something had felt off. Small things, tiny things, the kind of things you tell yourself you're imagining because you don't want to be that mother-in-law, the overprotective one, the one who doesn't think anyone is good enough for her son. Like the way Vanessa always changed the subject when I asked about her family. She'd told us her parents were deceased, that she had no siblings, that she was alone in the world, which was why she was so grateful to be joining our family. But once I'd asked her where she grew up, and she'd said Portland. Then, weeks later, she mentioned something about growing up in Seattle. When I'd brought it up, gently, just a casual observation, she'd laughed it off and said she'd lived in both places, moved around a lot as a kid. Or the way her phone was always face down, always on silent, and she never, ever let it out of her sight. Or the time I'd stopped by their apartment unannounced. Thomas and Vanessa had been living together for 6 months, and she'd answer the door looking flustered, blocking the entrance, saying it was a bad time. She'd been polite about it, apologetic even, but she hadn't let me in. Small things. Things that probably meant nothing. But now, sitting in my kitchen at 4 in the morning with Michael's voice still echoing in my head, those small things felt bigger. I pulled out my phone and looked at Vanessa's address. I'd been to her apartment with Thomas, but I knew she also kept a small house across town. She'd mentioned it once, said it was a rental property she was fixing up, an investment. Thomas had never been there, or if he had, he'd never mentioned it to me. I stared at the address. Go to her house tomorrow morning, early, before anyone else is awake. It was crazy. It was invasive. It was wrong. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Michael had been trying to tell me something, that he'd been trying to protect us. I finished my coffee as the sun began to rise, painting the sky outside my kitchen window in shades of pink and gold. And I made my decision. At 6:30 a.m., I was in my car. I'd showered, dressed in jeans and a sweater, and pulled my hair back into a ponytail. My hands were shaking slightly as I backed out of the driveway. The streets were mostly empty. A few early morning joggers, a man walking his dog. The coffee shop on Main Street was just opening, and I could see the barista inside flipping the sign from closed to open. It was a beautiful morning, cool and crisp, with that golden September light that makes everything look softer, gentler. I drove across town, my heart beating faster with every mile. What was I doing? What was I really expecting to find? Vanessa's house was in an older neighborhood, the kind with big trees and small yards and chain link fences. The houses were modest but well kept, with flower beds and American flags and lawn ornaments. Her house was at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, a small blue bungalow with white trim. The grass was neatly mowed. There were rose bushes along the front porch, though they weren't in bloom anymore. I parked across the street and sat there for a moment, staring at the house. There were no cars in the driveway, no lights on inside that I could see. It looked empty, peaceful, normal. I almost turned around, almost started the car and drove home and told myself I was being ridiculous, that grief was making me paranoid and that I needed to get myself together before the wedding this afternoon.
But then I heard Michael's voice again, as clear as if he were sitting in the passenger seat beside me. You'll understand everything. I got out of the car. The morning air was cool against my skin. I could hear birds singing in the trees. Somewhere nearby, someone was mowing their lawn, the sound distant and rhythmic. I crossed the street and walked up the driveway. My heart was pounding now. My mouth was dry. I knocked on the front door. No answer. I waited, counting to 30 in my head, then knocked again. Still nothing. I tried the doorknob. It was locked. I walked around to the side of the house, past a small gate that led to the backyard. The gate was unlocked. It creaked slightly as I pushed it open. The backyard was small and fenced in. There was a wooden deck, a grill, a few potted plants that looked like they needed watering. A sliding glass door led into what looked like the kitchen. I walked up to the door and cupped my hands against the glass, peering inside. The kitchen was neat, clean. A few dishes in the sink, a coffee maker on the counter. Nothing unusual. I tried the sliding door. It was unlocked. My breath caught in my throat. I stood there for a long moment, my hand on the door handle, knowing that what I was about to do was wrong, that I was about to cross a line I couldn't uncross. But I couldn't stop. I slid the door open and stepped inside. The house was silent. I stood in the kitchen, listening, waiting for some sound, some indication that I wasn't alone. But there was nothing, just the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of a clock somewhere down the hall. "Hello?" I called out softly. "Vanessa, are you home?" No answer. I moved through the kitchen slowly, my footsteps quiet on the tile floor. Everything looked normal, ordinary. A bowl of fruit on the counter,
a calendar on the wall with appointments written in neat handwriting, a stack of mail by the toaster. I picked up the mail, bills, mostly, all addressed to Vanessa Chin at this address. I set it down and moved into the living room. It was small and simply furnished, a gray couch, a coffee table with a few magazines, a TV mounted on the wall, bookshelves lined with paperbacks and framed photographs. I walked over to the photographs, studying them. There was one of Vanessa and Thomas smiling at the beach, one of Vanessa in her nursing scrubs, standing with a group of colleagues, one of Vanessa as a child, maybe 7 or 8 years old, standing in front of a house I didn't recognize. All normal, all exactly what you'd expect to find in someone's home. So why did I feel like something was wrong? I moved down the hallway. There were 3 doors. One was open, a bathroom. The other 2 were closed. I opened the first door. It was a bedroom. The master bedroom, I assumed. A queen-sized bed with a floral comforter, a dresser, a closet with the door half open, revealing clothes on hangers. I checked the closet quickly, feeling more and more like an intruder, like I was violating Vanessa's privacy for no reason. There was nothing there, just clothes, shoes, a few boxes on the top shelf. I closed the closet and left the bedroom. One more door. I stood in front of it, my hand on the doorknob. This was it. After this, I'd leave. I'd go home, apologize to Thomas for my paranoia, and get ready for the wedding. I opened the door, and everything changed. The room was dark. The curtains were drawn, blocking out the morning light. I fumbled for a light switch and flipped it on, and then I just stood there, frozen, staring. The walls were covered in photographs, not framed, not neat, just taped and pinned and tacked up, covering every inch of wall space from floor to ceiling. Photographs of Michael, my Michael, Michael at work, Michael getting into his car, Michael at the grocery store, Michael in our backyard gardening, Michael walking down the street, hundreds of them. My legs went weak. I grabbed the doorframe to steady myself. What was this? I stepped further into the room, my eyes scanning the walls in disbelief. There was a desk in the corner, covered in papers and notebooks. I walked over to it, my hands shaking. But notebooks were filled with handwriting. Vanessa's handwriting. I recognized it from the calendar in the kitchen. I opened one and started reading. Michael Hayes. Born June 3rd, 1970. Married to Eleanor Hayes. One son, Thomas Hayes. Works as an accountant at Morrison and Associates. Drives a 2015 Toyota Camry. License plate. I flipped the page. Daily routine. Leaves for work at 7:45 a.m. Takes Jefferson Street route. Stops at Corner Bakery every Wednesday for coffee and a muffin. Returns home at 6:30 p.m. My stomach turned. I flipped more pages. Details. So many details about Michael's life, his habits, his schedule, where he went, what he did, who he talked to. It was like she'd been studying him, watching him, stalking him. I set the notebook down and looked at the walls again. Some of the photographs had dates written on them in the corners. I walked closer, studying them. The earliest one I could find was dated 3 years ago. 3 years. Vanessa had been watching my husband for 3 years. I felt like I was going to be sick. I forced myself to keep looking, to understand. On the desk, beneath the notebooks, I found a folder. I opened it. Inside were newspaper clippings, all about Michael's death. Local accountant dies in car accident. Single vehicle crash claims the life of beloved father and husband. I'd read these articles before. In the horrible days after Michael died, when I was trying to make sense of what had happened. He'd been driving home from work on a rainy night in January. His car had gone off the road on a curve, crashed into a tree. The police said he'd been going too fast for the conditions, that he'd lost control. It was an accident, a tragic accident. That's what everyone said. But beneath the newspaper clippings, there was something else, a photograph. I picked it up with trembling hands. It was a photograph of Michael's car after the crash, crumpled and destroyed. But this wasn't a photo from a newspaper. This was taken from close up, personal. And in the corner, barely visible, I could see the edge of someone's hand, someone who had been standing there photographing the wreckage. The timestamp on the photo was from the night of the accident. Vanessa had been there. At the scene? My breath came in short, sharp gasps. The room felt like it was spinning. I set the photo down and backed away from the desk. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and called Thomas. He answered on the third ring, his voice groggy with sleep. "Mom? What's wrong? It's not even 7:30. "Where's Vanessa?" I asked, my voice sharp. "What? She's at her place, I think, getting ready." "Why? Mom, what's going on?" "I need you to come to her house right now. The one across town." "What? Mom, I can't. I've got—" "Thomas," my voice broke. "Please, please come right now. It's important. It's about your father." Older woman telling her story. Thomas sat down the notebook and picked up the folder with the newspaper clippings. He saw the photograph of the crashed car. "Oh my God," he breathed. We stood there in silence for a long moment. Then we heard it, the sound of a key in the front door. We both froze. "Thomas, are you here?" Vanessa's voice, bright and cheerful, calling from the living room. "I saw your car outside. What a nice surprise. I thought we weren't supposed to see each other until—" She appeared in the doorway and stopped. Her eyes moved from Thomas to me, then to the open notebooks on the desk, the photographs on the walls. Her face went pale. "I can explain," she said quickly. "Explain?" Thomas's voice was shaking. "Vanessa, what is all this? Why do you have hundreds of pictures of my father? Why do you have details about his life? Why—" His voice broke. "Why do you have a photo from the night he died?" Vanessa stood very still. Her hands were clenched into fists at her sides. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, quietly, almost inaudibly, she said, "Because I killed him." The world stopped. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't process what I'd just heard. Older woman telling her story. Thomas took a step back, his face white as paper. "What?" Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. She looked at me, then at Thomas, then at the floor. "I killed him," she repeated, louder this time. "It wasn't an accident. I I caused the crash. No, Thomas was shaking his head. No, that's not. The police said it was an accident. They said they were wrong, Vanessa said. I knew his route. I knew when he'd be driving home that night. I knew about the curve, the one where the road gets narrow. I waited there in my car. And when I saw him coming, She closed her eyes. I swerved into his lane, forced him off the road. Then I left before anyone else came, and I went back later after the police had left to take the photo, to make sure he was really gone. I felt like I was falling, like the ground had opened up beneath me. Why? The word came out as barely a whisper. Why would you do that? Vanessa looked at me, really looked at me. And what I saw in her eyes was pain, deep, consuming pain. Because he killed my mother, she said. She told us the story there, in that room, with the photographs of Michael watching us from every wall. Her real name wasn't Vanessa Chen. It was Vanessa Morrison. And her mother had been Michael's secretary at Morrison and Associates 23 years ago. Her name was Claire Morrison. She said, her voice flat, emotionless. Claire Morrison. She was 24 when she started working for your husband. She was smart, ambitious, kind. She was my whole world. She walked over to the wall and pointed to one of the photographs, not one of Michael, a different one. A woman with dark hair and a warm smile holding a baby. That's her. She turned back to face us. My mother was having an affair with your husband, she said, looking at me. For 2 years. He promised her he'd leave you, that they'd be together. She believed him. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. That's not true, I said. Michael would never. He did, Vanessa interrupted. I have letters, emails, proof. When I was old enough, my grandmother gave them to me, told me everything. I don't believe you, I said, but my voice wavered. You don't have to believe me, Vanessa said, but it's true. And when my mother got pregnant with his child, his second child, he panicked. He told her to get an abortion. She refused. So he fired her, cut off all contact, left her with nothing. Thomas was staring at her like she was a stranger. My mother fell apart, Vanessa continued. She was devastated, alone, broke. She slipped into a deep depression, and when I was 2 years old, she killed herself. Overdose. My grandmother found her. She looked at me with hard, cold eyes. Michael Hayes destroyed my mother, and he never paid for it. He went on with his perfect life, his perfect family, like she never existed, like I never existed. So you killed him, I said, my voice hollow. I spent years planning it, years watching him, learning everything about him, waiting for the right moments. And then I met Thomas. She looked at my son, and for the first time, her expression softened. I didn't plan that part. I was just gathering information, making sure I knew everything about Michael's life. And then I met his son at a coffee shop and you saw an opportunity, Thomas said bitterly. No, Vanessa's voice cracked. No, Thomas, that's not. I didn't mean to fall in love with you. That wasn't supposed to happen, but it did. And when it did, I told myself I'd stop, that I'd let it go, that I'd choose you over revenge. But you didn't, I said, my voice hollow. I tried, Vanessa whispered. I tried so hard, but every time I saw you, Eleanor, I saw the woman my mother could have been, the life she could have had. And every time I saw Michael, she wiped at her tears. I couldn't let it go. I couldn't forgive him. So you killed him, Thomas repeated. And then you stayed with me. You let me grieve. You comforted me. You let me introduce you to my mother. You planned a wedding. His voice was rising. You were going to marry me. Because I love you, Vanessa cried. Thomas, I love you. That part was real. That part is still real. Everything with you has been real. How can you say that? Thomas shouted. How can you say any of it was real when it was all built on a lie, when you murdered my father? Vanessa flinched. I stood there, watching them, feeling like I was in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. My husband had an affair. He'd had another child. He'd abandoned them both. And the woman my son loved had killed him for it. I need to call the police, I said quietly. Vanessa looked at me. She didn't argue, didn't protest. She just nodded. I know, she said. I've known this day would come. I've been waiting for it, honestly. Part of me wanted to be caught, wanted to confess. The guilt has been eating me alive. Good, Thomas said coldly. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands. But before I could dial, Vanessa spoke again. She said, There's something else you should know, looking at me. Something I didn't tell you. What? I asked wearily. I didn't know how much more I could take. Michael knew, Vanessa said, about me, about who I was. I froze. What? A few weeks before the crash, he saw me. I was following him, and he noticed. He confronted me, asked me who I was and why I was following him, and I told him the truth. I told him I was Claire Morrison's daughter. She paused, her eyes distant, remembering. He didn't deny it, didn't try to explain nor apologize. He just looked at me and said, Your mother made her own choices. That's all. Like she'd been nothing. Like I was nothing. I felt tears streaming down my face. But then, a few days later, he came to find me. He had this envelope, papers, legal papers. She walked over to the desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a manila envelope. She handed it to me. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside were documents, a will, papers setting up a trust fund, all in the name of Vanessa Morrison. He left me everything, Vanessa said quietly. Everything he had. Life insurance, savings, retirement accounts, all of it. And he left a letter. She pulled out a piece of paper, folded and worn, like it had been read many times. He said he was sorry, that he'd been a coward, that he'd failed my mother and me, and that he hoped this would make up for some of it. She handed me the letter. I read it through tears. It was Michael's handwriting, his words, apologizing, begging for forgiveness, saying he'd been wrong, that he'd been selfish and cruel, that he'd spent 23 years trying to forget, trying to convince himself it wasn't his fault. But it was his fault. He knew it. And in the end, he tried to make it right. Vanessa said, he changed his will the day before he died, met with his lawyer, signed the papers, made sure everything would go to me. She looked at me with red and swollen eyes. "And then I killed him," she whispered, "before he could even tell you, before he could explain, before he could try to fix what he'd broken. I killed him."
She sank to the floor, sobbing. "I killed him," she repeated. "And I've been living with it every single day since. The guilt, the horror of what I'd done. And then I fell in love with his son, and I tried to pretend I could have a normal life, a happy life. But I couldn't, because I'm a murderer. And no matter how much I love Thomas, that will never change." I called the police. They came within 10 minutes. 2 officers, then detectives, then crime scene investigators. Vanessa didn't resist. She confessed to everything, calmly, clearly. She showed them the photographs, the notebooks, the proof of her planning. She told them how she'd done it, how she'd forced Michael off the road, how she'd watched from a distance to make sure he was dead before she left. They arrested her. I watched as they led her out of the house in handcuffs. She looked back at Thomas one last time, her eyes pleading, desperate. "I'm sorry, Thomas. I'm so sorry. I love you. Please believe me. I love you." Thomas said nothing. He just stood there, frozen, watching her disappear into the police car. The wedding, of course, was canceled. I called the venue, the caterer, the photographer, made the announcements, sent the messages. Due to unforeseen circumstances, the wedding of Thomas Hayes and Vanessa Chen has been canceled. I didn't explain, didn't give details. People would find out soon enough. It would be in the news. The trial would be public. But for now, I just needed to take care of my son. Thomas moved back home. He didn't talk much, barely ate, spent most of his time in his old bedroom, staring at the ceiling. I understood. We were both grieving, again. Grieving Michael, grieving the truth about who he'd been, grieving the life Thomas had thought he was going to have with Vanessa, grieving the person we thought Vanessa was. It took weeks before Thomas could talk about it. We were sitting on the back porch one evening watching the sun set. The oak tree Michael and I had planted was shedding its leaves now, carpeting the yard in gold and red. "I keep thinking about Dad," Thomas said quietly. "Me too," I said. "He wasn't the man I thought he was," Thomas said. "He had an affair. He abandoned a woman and a child. He ran away from his responsibilities." I nodded. "Yes, he did. But he also tried to make it right," Thomas continued. "In the end, he left Vanessa everything, wrote that letter. He tried." "He did," I agreed. "It wasn't enough. It could never undo the harm, but he tried." Thomas was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I loved her, Mom. I really loved her." "I know, sweetheart. And I think she really loved me too. I think that part was true."
I think so too, I said. But she killed Dad, Tommy said, his voice breaking. She killed him. And I don't know how to reconcile those two things. That she could love me and still do something so horrible. I reached over and took his hand. I said, people are complicated. They can hold love and hate in the same heart. They can be victims and perpetrators. They can make terrible choices and still be capable of real emotion. It doesn't make it okay, Thomas said. No, I agreed. It doesn't. We sat there in silence, holding hands, watching the sun disappear below the horizon. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Vanessa pled guilty to voluntary manslaughter. She expressed remorse. Her lawyer presented evidence of Michael's abandonment of her and her mother, the trauma she'd experienced, the years of pain and anger that had driven her to revenge. It didn't excuse what she'd done, but it explained it. She was sentenced to 15 years in prison. I attended every day of the trial. So did Thomas. We needed to hear it, all of it. Needed to understand how our lives had been shattered by secrets and lies and choices made long before either of us knew the truth. On the last day after the sentencing, Vanessa looked at us from across the courtroom. She mouthed 2 words, "I'm sorry." Thomas looked away, but I nodded. I didn't forgive her, not exactly, but I understood her. And in some small way, I pitied her. She'd spent her whole life carrying the weight of her mother's pain, and in trying to avenge it, she destroyed her own chance at happiness. There were no winners in this story, only survivors. It's been 6 months since that morning. 6 months since I walked into Vanessa's house and discovered the truth. Thomas is doing better, slowly. He's back at work, started seeing a therapist. He even went on a date last week, though he said it was too soon and he wasn't ready. But he's healing. We both are. I've done a lot of thinking in these months about Michael, about the man I married, about the secrets he kept. I'm angry at him, even now. Angry that he had an affair. Angry that he abandoned Claire and Vanessa. Angry that he left me to pick up the pieces of the mess he made. But I also miss him, the man I knew, the man who made me laugh, who held my hand during movies, who planted trees with me and built a life with me. Both versions of Michael were real, the good and the bad, the loving husband and the man who failed someone else completely. I'm learning to hold both truths at the same time, and I'm learning that sometimes love isn't simple. It's complicated and messy and full of contradictions, but it's also powerful. Powerful enough to make a dead man leave everything to the daughter he'd never known, trying to right a 23-year-old wrong. Powerful enough to send that daughter fall in love with his son, even as she planned his murder. Powerful enough to send a warning from beyond the grave. Because I still believe that's what happened that night. Michael came to me in that dream. Somehow, some way, he knew. He knew what was about to happen. He knew that Vanessa's guilt was eating her alive, that the truth was going to come out, and he wanted to protect us. wanted to protect Thomas from marrying someone carrying that terrible secret. I don't know if I believe in ghosts, in the supernatural, in messages from the dead, but I believe in that dream. I believe Michael loved us enough to warn us, even after everything, even with all his flaws and failures. He protected us one last time. I visited Vanessa once, 3 months after the sentencing. I don't know why I felt compelled to go. Thomas thought I was crazy. Maybe I was. But I needed to see her, needed to talk to her without the lawyers and the judge and the reporters watching. The prison visiting room was exactly like you see in movies. Gray walls, metal tables, guards standing watch, the smell of industrial cleaner and too many bodies in too small of a space. Vanessa looked different, thinner, older. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, no makeup, prison uniform instead of the pretty dresses she used to wear. But her eyes were the same, dark and deep and full of sadness. We sat across from each other, neither of us speaking for a long moment. Finally, I said, "I read your mother's letters." Vanessa looked up, surprised. The police gave them back to me after the trial. They were evidence, but they said I could have them since Michael was my husband. I'd spent a week reading those letters, every single one. Letters from Claire Morrison to Michael Hayes. Letters full of love and hope and eventually desperation. They were heartbreaking. "She loved him," I said. "Your mother. She really loved him." Vanessa nodded, her eyes filling with tears. She did. And he loved her too, I think, in his way. But not enough to be brave, not enough to do the right thing. No, Vanessa agreed quietly. Not enough. We sat in silence for a moment. Then I said, I found something else in Michael's papers. Something the police didn't take because it wasn't evidence. It was a letter. To you. He'd written it but never sent it. I pulled the envelope from my purse and slid it across the table. Vanessa stared at it, her hands trembling. "What does it say?" "I didn't read it. It's addressed to you. It's yours." She picked up the envelope slowly, like it might burn her. Her name was written on the front in Michael's handwriting. Vanessa Morrison. "He knew who you were," I said, "before he died, and he wanted to tell you something. I think you should know what it was." Vanessa's hands were shaking so badly she could barely open the envelope. She pulled out the letter, 2 pages, handwritten, and began to read. I watched as tears streamed down her face, watched as she read whatever Michael had wanted to say to the daughter he'd never raised. When she finished, she folded the letter carefully and held it against her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. "Eleanor, thank you." I nodded. "I need you to know something," I said. "I don't forgive you for what you did. I don't think I ever will. You took my husband from me. You took Thomas's father. And no matter what Michael did, no matter how badly he failed you and your mother, he didn't deserve to die." Vanessa nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I know, you're right, he didn't. But I also need you to know that I understand. I understand the pain you carried, the anger, the need for justice. I don't agree with what you did, but I understand why you did it. That's more than I deserve, Vanessa said. Maybe, I agreed, but it's the truth. I stood to leave. Eleanor.
We were both grieving. Again. Grieving Michael. Grieving the truth about who he'd been. Grieving the life Thomas had thought he was going to have with Vanessa. Grieving the person we thought Vanessa was. It took weeks before Thomas could talk about it. We were sitting on the back porch one evening watching the sun set. The oak tree Michael and I had planted was shedding its leaves now, carpeting the yard in gold and red. "I keep thinking about Dad," Thomas said quietly. "Me too," I said. "He wasn't the man I thought he was," Thomas said. "He had an affair. He abandoned a woman and a child. He ran away from his responsibilities." I nodded. "Yes, he did." "But he also tried to make it right," Thomas continued. "In the end, he left Vanessa everything, wrote that letter. He tried." "He did," I agreed. "It wasn't enough. It could never undo the harm, but he tried." Thomas was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I loved her, Mom. I really loved her." "I know, sweetheart. And I think she really loved me too. I think that part was true." "I think so too," I said. "But she killed Dad," Tommy said, his voice breaking. "She killed him. And I don't know how to reconcile those two things, that she could love me and still do something so horrible." I reached over and took his hand. I said, "People are complicated. They can hold love and hate in the same heart. They can be victims and perpetrators. They can make terrible choices and still be capable of real emotion." "It doesn't make it okay," Thomas said. "No," I agreed. "It doesn't." So, sure, we'd figured out how to be happy. I thought about the life we'd built together. This house, our son, 25 years of memories. I thought about the things I'd known about him. His kindness, his humor, the way he sang off-key in the shower, the way he always saved me the last bite of dessert. And I thought about the things I hadn't known. The affair, the other woman, the child he'd abandoned, the secret life he'd kept from me. Both versions were true. Both were Michael. And somehow, I had to find a way to love the man he'd been, while also acknowledging the things he'd done wrong. It wasn't easy. Some days it felt impossible. But I was trying. I pulled out my phone and opened the photo album. Scrolled through pictures of Michael and me, Michael and Thomas, our family, whole and happy, in all those frozen moments before everything fell apart. I stopped on one photo. It was from Thomas's high school graduation. Michael had his arm around Thomas, both of them grinning at the camera. I was standing on Thomas's other side, my hand on his shoulder. We looked happy. We were happy. And that was real too, as real as everything that came after. I touched Michael's face on the screen. "I wish you told me," I whispered. "I wish you trusted me enough to tell me the truth. Maybe I could have helped.
Maybe we could have found her together. Maybe, but maybe didn't matter now. What mattered was moving forward, healing, learning to live with the complicated truth of who Michael had been, and protecting Thomas, the way Michael had tried to protect us in the end. I closed my phone and lay back on my pillow, staring at the ceiling. The dream hadn't come back. I hadn't seen Michael again since that night, but I felt him sometimes, in the quiet moments, in the way the morning light came through the kitchen window, in the way the oak tree rustled in the breeze. I felt him watching over us, and I chose to believe that wherever he was at peace, that he'd found forgiveness even if I hadn't fully found it yet, that he knew we were going to be okay. 6 months turned into a year. Thomas started dating someone new, a teacher named Rebecca. Kind, patient, steady, everything he needed. He brought her to Sunday dinner one week, and I watched them together. The easy way they talked, the way she made him laugh, the way he looked at her without that shadow of pain that had haunted his eyes for so long. He was healing. We both were. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted. I'd cleaned out Michael's study finally, packed away his things, kept what mattered, donated the rest, and I'd started painting again. Something I used to love before I got too busy with work and family and life. I set up an easel in the spare room and spent my evenings painting landscapes, trees, skies, the backyard with that oak tree Michael and I had planted all those years ago. It was therapeutic, putting color on canvas, creating something beautiful out of the messiness of life. One evening, Thomas stopped by. He found me in my makeshift studio covered in paint, working on a new piece. "That's beautiful, Mom," he said, looking at the canvas. "Thank you," I said. During his vows, he talked about second chances, about learning to trust again, about finding light in the darkness. And I knew he was going to be okay. We were both going to be okay. Vanessa is still in prison. She'll be there for another 13 years. Thomas writes to her sometimes, not often, but occasionally. Letters updating her on his life, telling him he's doing well, that he's happy. He says it helps him, that it's part of his healing process. I don't write to her, but I think about her sometimes. I think about a young woman who lost her mother too soon, who grew up carrying pain and anger and a need for justice, who made a terrible choice that destroyed lives, including her own. And I hope that someday she finds peace too. As for me, I'm learning to live with the complexity of it all. Michael wasn't perfect. He made terrible mistakes. He hurt people. He failed in ways I never knew about when he was alive. But he also loved us. He provided for us. He tried, in the end, to make things right. And he protected us, even after death. I still believe that dream was real, that Michael came to warn me, that he knew something terrible was about to happen, and he found a way to stop it. I don't know how. I don't know if it was his spirit, or my intuition, or some cosmic coincidence. But I know it saved us. It saved Thomas from a marriage built on lies, saved us from years of living with someone who was carrying a secret that would have eventually destroyed everything. And maybe that was Michael's final gift to us, his way of saying, "I'm sorry," his way of showing us that despite everything,
Despite his failures and his secrets, he loved us enough to protect us one last time.
During his vows, he talked about second chances, about learning to trust again, about finding light in the darkness. And I knew he was going to be okay. We were both going to be okay. Vanessa is still in prison. She'll be there for another 13 years. Thomas writes to her sometimes, not often, but occasionally, letters updating her on his life, telling her he's doing well, that he's happy. He says it helps him, that it's part of his healing process. I don't write to her, but I think about her sometimes. I think about a young woman who lost her mother too soon, who grew up carrying pain and anger and a need for justice, who made a terrible choice that destroyed lives, including her own. And I hope that someday she finds peace too. As for me, I'm learning to live with the complexity of it all. Michael wasn't perfect. He made terrible mistakes. He hurt people. He failed in ways I never knew about when he was alive. But he also loved us. He provided for us. He tried, in the end, to make things right. And he protected us, even after death. I still believe that dream was real, that Michael came to warn me, that he knew something terrible was about to happen, and he found a way to stop it. I don't know how. I don't know if it was his spirit or my intuition or some cosmic coincidence, but I know it saved us. It saved Thomas from a marriage built on lies, saved us from years of living with someone who was carrying a secret that would have eventually destroyed everything. And maybe that was Michael's final gift to us, his way of saying, I'm sorry, his way of showing us that despite everything, despite his failures and his secrets, he loved us enough to protect us one last time. I'm standing in the backyard now, watching the sun set behind the oak tree. It's gotten so big over the years, strong and solid, its branches reaching toward the sky. We planted it together, Michael and I, when Thomas was born. We wanted something that would grow with him, something that would last. And it has. It's outlived Michael. It'll probably outlive me too. But it's still here, still standing, still growing, just like us. I touch the bark, rough and warm under my palm. Thank you, I whisper, to Michael, to the universe, to whatever force brought me that dream and led me to the truth. Thank you for protecting us, for loving us, even when it was complicated, even when it was hard. The wind rustles through the leaves, and for just a moment, I swear I can hear his voice. I love you, Eleanor. Always. I close my eyes and breathe in the evening air. Cool and crisp, smelling of autumn and earth and new beginnings. And I realize something. I've forgiven him. Not because what he did was okay, not because the pain he caused doesn't matter, but because holding on to anger was hurting me more than it was hurting him. And because life is too short and too precious to waste on bitterness. Michael was human, flawed and complicated, and capable of both great love and terrible mistakes, just like all of us. And in the end, he tried to make things right. He acknowledged his failures. He provided for the daughter he'd never known. And he warned us one last time.
That has to count for something. I open my eyes and look up at the tree, at the sky beyond it, painted in shades of orange and pink and purple. It's beautiful. The world is still beautiful, even after everything. And I'm still here, still standing, still growing, just like this tree. I go back inside as the stars begin to appear. Thomas and Rebecca are coming for dinner tomorrow. He called earlier to ask if he could bring something. I told him just to bring himself and his wife, that I'd take care of everything else. I'm making his favorite, pot roast, the way Michael used to make it. The recipe he learned from his mother and taught to me when we were first married. It feels right, keeping those traditions alive, passing them down, remembering the good things, even while acknowledging the complicated ones. I set the table for 3, put out the nice dishes, light a candle in the center. And I set a 4th place, too. Just an empty chair. Just a small acknowledgement. Michael's not here. Not really. But he's not entirely gone either. He's in this house we built together, in the son we raised, in the oak tree growing in the backyard. He's in my memories, the good ones and the painful ones. He's in the lessons we learned about honesty, about the cost of secrets, about the importance of facing our mistakes instead of running from them. And he's in that dream, that warning, that final act of love. I sit down at the table and look at the empty chair. I miss you, I say quietly. I'm angry at you sometimes, sad other times, but I miss you. And I'm grateful for the warning, for trying to protect us, for loving us the best way you knew how. Older woman telling her story. The candle flickers in the silence, and I smile, because I know something now that I didn't know 2 years ago. Love is complicated, messy, full of contradictions and mistakes and moments of grace, but it's also powerful, powerful enough to transcend death, powerful enough to forgive, powerful enough to heal. That night, I dream of Michael again. We're in the backyard. The oak tree is there, full and green and beautiful. Michael is standing beneath it, smiling at me. He looks young, healthy, happy. The way I remember him from our early years together before life got complicated. You did good, Eleanor, he says. So did you, I say. In the end, you tried. I should have tried sooner, he says. I should have been braver. Yes, I agree. You should have. But you can't change the past. None of us can. We can only try to do better going forward. He nods. Take care of Thomas. Always, I promise. And take care of yourself, he says. Be happy, Eleanor. You deserve it. So do you, I say. He smiles, that cricket smile I fell in love with all those years ago. I'm at peace now, he says. Finally. I hope someday you will be too. I'm getting there, I say.
He reaches out, and this time I can touch him. I take his hand. It's warm and solid and real.
Thank you, I whisper, for the warning, for protecting us. Always, he says, even from beyond the grave. Always. And then I wake up. The room is dark and quiet. The clock reads 3:47 a.m., the same time I woke up 2 years ago. But this time, I'm not afraid. I'm not panicked. I'm at peace. I close my eyes and drift back to sleep, and I don't dream again. Sometimes love protects us even from beyond the grave. Sometimes the people we lose find ways to guide us, to warn us, to keep us safe. Sometimes the truth is more complicated than we ever imagined, full of pain and betrayal, and also grace and redemption. Sometimes forgiveness is a choice we make, not for the person who hurt us, but for ourselves. And sometimes healing comes not from forgetting, but from remembering. Remembering the whole truth, the good and the bad, the love and the mistakes, and choosing to move forward anyway. That's what I learned from all of this. The life is complicated. People are complicated. Love is complicated. But it's also worth it. Every messy, painful, beautiful moment of it. Michael is gone. But the love we shared, complicated as it was, that's still here. In Thomas, in our home, in that oak tree growing strong in the backyard, and in the warning he gave me, the dream that saved us. That love, that protection, that final act of grace, that's what I choose to remember. That's what I choose to carry forward. Because in the end, that's what matters most. Not the mistakes, not the failures, not the secrets, but the love. Always the love. Even from beyond the grave. Especially from beyond the grave. Sometimes love protects us even from beyond the grave. And I'll spend the rest of my life being grateful for that. For Michael's warning, for the truth we discovered, for the healing we found, for the life we're still living, for the love that never really dies.